Comic Book Savant, episode 453. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant podcast. I'm your host, James Harris. In this episode, we're going to be doing a Cutting a Stack episode. I haven't done a full-on multi-comic review episode in a little bit, so I wanted to get back to doing these kind of episodes. This is going to be Cutting the Stack Marvel episode 5. So it's been a while since, when I started doing the Cutting the Stacks, I would do just random comics all mixed into one, and then I started kind of boiling them down into, Marvel, DC, Image, and then independent books. So this is the first Marvel one that I've done in a little bit. So in this episode, we're going to go over 5 individual issues that I had a chance to read. But before we get into that, like always, I like to give a shout out to my friends over at the Comics Podcast Network. You can find them over at comicspodcast.com. If you listen to this show and you like the content I create, you want to find more similar to it or adjacent to it, it's a great one-stop shop where you can go to one site, one portal, and literally find hundreds of different comic book related content, be it podcasts, videos, be it a single person podcast, so something like what I do, to a roundtable discussion, to multi host. You can find anything specific to publishers, teams, or individual characters. So you have a great variety to pick and choose from through that platform of the Comics Podcast Network. I've been associated with them since their very beginning until this day. I'm a proud member, so it's definitely like a good spot if you're just a listener of comic book related content, or even if you're an up and coming content creator, you want to get your show or your content listed on there. You can contact the administrators and you can see about becoming a member and getting your content added on. So definitely it has multi purposes if you're just a consumer of comic book related content, or you're a creator. It has dual purposes. So definitely worth checking out over at the Comics Podcast Network over at comicspodcast.com. Now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this episode of Cutting the Stack, or Cutting My Stack. Excuse me. The first book that I checked out, and I've talked about this in previous episodes, and be it trade reviews, cutting my stack, just in general comic discussion episodes, I've talked on the thing of me becoming a little bit more nostalgic. And when I was younger, I never really went back. If I read a comic, I never went back to revisit it. And doing something like this podcast over the years has allowed me to go back and reflect on, when I was a teenager to when I was 20, when I was a teenager to when I was 30, now me being in my 40s, to go back and reflect. So I've been jumping around, and when I've done these episodes, especially when it's Marvel and DC, and being on more digital, with Comixology Unlimited, DC Universe, I'm getting more of these classic comic books made available as part of my subscription, that I can go back and read these first appearances of classic characters. And I'm a huge fan, and I've talked about this a little bit, maybe not as much as I've gone on about other characters. I like the Punisher. So I went back, and this was a book that one of my cousins that really influenced me to get into comics, had this actual comic, and I remember he wouldn't let me take it out the plastic so I could never read it, but I held the issue, the original first printing of Amazing Spider-Man 129, which was the first appearance of the Punisher. It's written by Jerry Conway, and the artwork is done by Russ Andrew. And I had a chance to read it via Comixology Unlimited to check it out. And it's interesting because, like I said, it was a book that I saw, but I never got a chance to read. And I've been a huge, Punisher fan, more recently in the Greg Rucka stuff that he did over his run over in Marvel, and the original Garth Ennis run, where Welcome Back Frank, those kind of things that influenced the character in the early iterations of the movie, and even the Punisher television show. So definitely was stoked to go back and read this. And it's definitely like a, throwaway, but it was well throwback, and it was definitely well written. The artwork was, was solid. It was interesting to see that, far as the appearance of the Punisher and how he was presented, he's still kind of that black with white accents. I mean, they've had, back then he didn't have a trench coat, but really, far as his original appearance, when we got him in his first appearance, I mean, he's been tweaked, but he's still that classic Punisher character, as far as the overall look and feel, of the character. It was very well written. Jerry Conway it was fun. It was like very, very pleasant. And sometimes I have mixed experiences depending how far you go back and who, wrote some of the stuff. I know I reviewed in previous episodes where I read some old, Avengers stuff that was way back, like written by Stan Lee, and some of the very, very early writers, and how certain things was very elementary, very basic, and some were kind of hard to read and get through because it was a whole different time, and even then, like in the early mid 60s, this was a whole nother thing. For me, I'm an 80s kid. So, some of it can be jarring, some of it can be kind of clunky, and it doesn't flow as nearly as smoothly as comics we've gotten accustomed to in the current day. But it's a good history lesson to know where these characters came from, how they evolved over time. So I really enjoyed it. I would have to say for Amazing Spider-Man 129, I gave it a 7 out of 10. I give it a good read rating. Like I said, it wasn't nearly as bad as some of the more older comics that I've read. And like I said, it was a good read, like solid artwork, like the story arc. And I've been going back like since, looking to pick up like the Epic collections digitally, the old Spider-Man stuff, so I can read kind of this era. I kind of like where certain things were plot lines and things were being set up, and I definitely want to go back and explore some of this more with the Amazing Spider-Man. So I have, since reading this, have picked up some of the Epic collections and things of that nature to dive a little bit deeper in this time period of Spider-Man. Next book that I had a chance to read was Avengers issue 19. This is written by Stan Lee, artwork done by Don Heck, inker is Dick Ayers, and I'm trying to remember here. Let me pull it up here. I'm trying to remember what the cover was on this one. I think this was just was this someone? No, okay. This one had the swordsman in it. That's what it was. I was trying to remember, was it someone's first appearance? I don't think it was the swordman's first appearance, but he was the prominent character in the issue, and a little bit clunky to read. And these are, legends, rest in peace, Stan Lee. And, again, he's so synonymous with the history of Marvel, so going back and actually reading these beginning books, like this is Avengers issue 19, this is early Avengers, stuff. And, it was interesting. It felt a little bit more clunky. It wasn't nearly as smooth of a read as the Jerry Conway previous issue I read with Amazing Spider-Man 129. But it was fun, but it was cute, truly a book of its time, in that way. The artwork, again, Don Heck, legend. So it's definitely something far as like you have to get adjusted to, because it's a whole different mindset when you read comics nowadays and you go back and you read something along these lines. It's definitely jarring in a lot of ways, but again, I didn't feel like it was off-putting in any manner. Again, it does take some adjustment reading it, because it's different. It's the best way that I could describe it. But it's cool seeing the history, because I'm always been a fan of team books. So it's, I've delved in and I've poked here, and I've bought various time points of like issues of the Avengers over the past few years, especially with the MCU and the build up to Infinity War. And it started maybe about Age of Ultron. Like I picked up the first appearance of Vision, and just random like historical issues when different movies came out, and read different eras of of these books that they're being more and more reprints are coming out. You have things like Epic Collections. Things are being made like with subscription services like Marvel Unlimited, Comixology Unlimited, where again, you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars to get these issues. If you just want to read them for the historical context, you can read those, and it's been a fun experiment. And I haven't gone like hog wild and like read issues upon issues, but randomly for nostalgia purposes, I just like to jump in. I try to do my reading as free form as possible. Like I can't like predetermine like today I'm gonna sit down and read this. Certain times I'm into certain moods for certain books, and they kind of just call out to me, and I just kind of look to see what's available at my fingertips. And that's the thing that I personally like about digital, because sometimes even if I have some stuff that I bought, like with Comixology Unlimited or DC Universe, I could just be browsing along and be like, that looks interesting today. I like that cover. Let me read it. As far as where I rate this particular issue, I would have to give it a 6 out of 10. It's a kind of my wait for the trade, rating. Again, it was very clunky. It's very much a book of its time. I didn't know much about the Swordsman, so it was interesting in seeing newly minted Avengers, Hawkeye, Scarlet the Witch, Vision, which are funny, some of my favorite Avengers of all time. In that mix when they were very early in their career as Avengers, and seeing a Captain America not too long after being reawoken from the ice, still kind of finding his niche and where he fit in this new world, is definitely like very interesting, and I look forward to reading more of these books as time goes on, as well. Next book I had a chance to read is Star Wars Lando Double or Nothing, issue 1. This is written by Rodney Barnes. Artwork is done by Paolo Barnes. Paolo Vanilla. Villanella. I'm all mixed up today. I'm looking at it. I'm reading them, getting names mixed up. Okay, so Paolo Vanilla. Villanella. Nella? I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. Colorist is Andres Mosa, and lettering is done by Joe Carmanga. And this is, I guess this was coming after or around the time, maybe as far as the release of it, was in or around that time period when Lando came out a couple of years ago. I saw it. I haven't finished reading it yet. I think I read the first 1 or 2 issues of a Lando series before Han came out, that was written by Charles Soule. That was also a limited series that I started reading that was really, really good, that I didn't finish. And I think this was a part of this Marvel Unlimited that I checked out the first issue, or it was on sale for super cheap, and I picked it up. And I had to say I was pleasantly surprised by it. I have since then have on Comixology Unlimited, they have the first trade available, so I checked that out, and I'm actually going to be doing a trade review here on the channel coming up on the full trade. So it was one of those things. I give it a 6 out of 10. It's middle of the road. This is definitely young Lando. From the likeness is drawn as I'm totally blanking on his name. Glover. Whoever played Lando in the movie, you know what I mean. Childish Gambino. I'm totally whiffing on his name right now. That's why you have things like the internet at your fingertips. To I don't know why I'm like not remembering his name. I'm seeing his face all day long, and I cannot think of his name. Oh, I'm getting old. That's what it is. I'm like at that middle age, so I'm like 44. So it's like starting to catch up to me. I'm starting to get old. Donald Glover. I want to say Kristen Glover, but Donald Glover. It follows his likeness, and it's very much his take on the character as we saw in Solo for sure. I'm far as what I gather from the first issue. This is definitely pre where we see him in Solo for sure. And it's fun. As far as where I rate this a 6 out of 10. But it was enough for me, again, to being a Star Wars fan. It's well drawn. It was well paced, well written, enough to pull me in to, like I said, check out the trade. When I run out and buy this, if this was on sale and I could get this for like, $3 or $4, which normally like these size trades when they're on sale on, like on digital services, what they kind of go for, I would pick it up for that much. Like I said, it drew me in enough that I wanted to finish the story. It'll seem like it's going to be a light, fun, quick paced story, something that once I sit down and read the rest of it, that I could probably knock it out in one sitting. I think it's probably going to be like, I don't even think it's 200 pages long. This is going to be a relatively quick, fun, little, I think it was a 5-issue limited series. So this will be a quick read. So again, I will be doing a follow-up review and give more in-depth thoughts about the story and everything else once I finish reading it. But again, it did pique my interest enough to continue on and finish the limited series for sure. Next book that I want to talk about is Uncanny XMen 266. This is the first appearance of Gambit. This was I'm gonna preface this first. I'm a huge Gambit fan. For especially like the early mid 2000s, like coming off of also the animated series, I became a huge fan of Gambit, and Rogue is one of my favorite female characters in comics, period. So I always loved the dynamic of their relationship. And it was cool. I always saw this cover. I never owned this book, so it was cool that they do a little promotion recently where they start Marvel. It will give away like 4 random issues each month through Comixology that you could get for free. And maybe a couple of months ago, this was one of the issues, and I was like, oh, I always had a chance to see this cover. This was one of when I was still collecting physical comics. It was a book that I sought out because I was a huge fan of Gambit, but it was always so hard or it was so expensive when I did find it that I couldn't afford it, so I never read it. This book is written by Chris Claremont. Artwork is done by Mike Collins. Inker is Joseph Rubinstein, and colorist is Brad Vacanta. And it was cool to finally read this book because, like I said, I was a huge Gambit fan. I always wanted to see his first appearance. And again, like he's always been a favorite of mine. It was interesting to see how different core characteristics that I got to know through the animated series and later. Primarily, I'm going to say like in the early mid 2000s when maybe Scott Lobdell and Joe Madureira were writing and drawing the Uncanny XMen, I want to think it is, and they were in space, and it was the whole love triangle going on between Gambit, Rogue, and the clone of Magneto. What was his name? Joseph. I'm like really dating myself, but like that's when I really kind of like tuned into that character. So it was kind of cool seeing him from the start, the way he evolved. Even his powers were slightly different on how in this first appearance they were presented. It was more like not where he could just generate the his energy into the cards from his hand. He would do a thing where he would transfer the energy from his eyes to whatever item he was throwing, then he would throw it. So that, and it was had a green hue, which later we do know that whenever they really showed Gambit use his powers, it kind of had a purple or maybe a fuchsia kind of tint to it. So it was very interesting seeing those changes because I never knew about those things. So it was really cool seeing like those evolution. He had the trench coat, all that kind of stuff. Overall, unfortunately for the issue, I would have to give it like a 5.5 out of 10. I'll give it a rating of a wait for the trade. The artwork was not that great. The writing was solid. The artwork wasn't the best. It was mad as a comic. It's kind of funny because like you read it, like especially reading that Amazing Spider-Man 129, which is the first appearance of the Punisher, which was so well written. To hear this was well written as well, and the artwork was really by Russell Andrews. It was really fit and was good. It felt like art at the time. Here, I don't know. It was a weird mix. I don't know if it was a particular artist or the artist-inker combination, because sometimes that could throw off artwork in a book. It just didn't look good to me. And sometimes, as much as you want a well-written comic, you want a well-written comic with aesthetically pleasing artwork, and it kind of lacked in that area. And I apologize for that screeching noise in the background if you could hear it, but I live in an apartment and I have to deal with the outside noises sometimes. So I do apologize for that. So yeah, I would give it a 5.5 out of 10. I'm glad I finally read it. I kind of would have been irked and, well, I don't know. I guess if I was a speculator and I bought this for a bunch of money, could flip it later for even more money, I guess fine. But as like just a fan of what I would, I guess, imagine for such a strong character, like this first appearance was kind of like a letdown of the issue overall. But Chris Claremont knocked it out on the writing duties. It was a great story. Just the artwork did not meet the expectations of the great writing that was on the pages. Last but not least, book number 5 that I want to talk about is Uncanny XMen. This is the Uncanny XMen before the new the new stuff that's going on, Powers of X and House of X. This was the book right before that, from the 2018 to 2019. This is the director's cut. It's written by Ed Brisson, Matthew Rosenberg, and Kelly Thompson. And artwork done is by Mahmoud Asar, Mark Bagley, and Mirko Kolik. And I try to stay positive, so I'm going to be as positive as possible. This was a hot dumpster fire is what I would like to call this. The beginning of the comic started off very promising in the initial story because this was a oversized issue, director's cut. And that's something they're doing now. Like I said, I redeemed some of my Marvel points to get this, and it was just the only reason why I picked it up. And I was curious because I'm starting to see they're doing this more and more, especially at Marvel, where they're charging, like, instead of the standard $4.99, they're charging like $7, $8.99 and doing these director's cuts that are issues where are like the size of trade, which are 200, and I think this was like 220 some pages. And it had multiple stories. It had 3 main stories, one written by each writer, had multiple artists on the book. The first story was decent. And then as the book went on, everything, the writing, the artwork, everything just declined throughout. And I love Mark Bagley as an artist. I don't know who it was that was inking him, but it looked so, and I mean, it's nothing better. And now I'll say this, I've seen Mark Bagley's work for years, since the 80s, and I think, what was the first thing I really remember Mark Bagley on? Was it The New Warriors back in the mid 80s? Or 90s, that was more like 90s, my bad, 90s. New Warriors was 90s. I've been rocking with Mark Bagley the long way for a long time. And he's one of those artists, when he has time, his artwork is so beautiful. You think about his Ultimate Spider-Man run, his Thunderbolts run. When he's at the top of his game, it's exquisite. I felt like his pencils were there, but I just feel like whoever was inking his work kind of like butchered it, and it did not look good, and was so disappointing because it's nothing better. He's one of those like classic artists in my opinion, that he just has a classic style, and when it's clean and it's tight, it works so well, and it's so memorable, and it stands out so much. So that just annoyed me as well. And I just hate seeing these these things thrown out, these gimmicks, like these director's cuts, where it was just like, it was the 3 different stories. And like I said, they progressively got worse, and the artwork was worse. It would just seem like the more it went on, the more the story just disintegrated and collapsed on top of itself, and just wasn't good. I was struggling to get through it. As the longer it went on, the harder it was to push through to finish reading it. Far as all the extra bonuses they had, they were showing pencils to ink to colored pages. It was just a bunch of nonsense thrown in to drive up the price of the book. And and like I said, I like quality over quantity. So I would have rather had less stories and better artwork, like I said, but not all the artwork was bad. But everything just digressed. As the longer it went on, as the more it just got worse, which just made it for like a price point of like $7 or $8.99 for this air quotes director's cut edition. It's just some of the problems that I have with comics, where I don't rush out on Wednesday, even digitally, because I buy most, my books digitally for the most part, then I don't rush out and pay full price. I wait, because certain times you'll see things along this line that it's not worth the cover price. Like, if you're gonna put top tier talent on the book and it's quality, then do that. I'm all for that, and do that, and I'm all for it. I'll throw my money at the screen or throw it at, you know what I mean? But when you put out mediocre content like this, it doesn't match the level of work doesn't match the cover price that you're charging for the book, and then that shows you don't care about your product and you don't care about your consumers that buy your product. And that's how I feel about that, and that's all I'm gonna really say when it comes to this. So I'm definitely looking forward to reading the new House of what is it? House of X, Powers of 10 stuff going on. That I'm looking forward to finally getting a chance to read all that kind of stuff. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm definitely looking forward to checking it out, because anything has to be better than what I read in this elongated, drawn out issue that was just, like I said, I didn't even tell you my rating. I gave it a 4 out of 10. It's just subpar read material. You can borderline put this at a skip it. Like, it's just, well, no, the first story was okay. I'll say the first story out of the 3 was the best one out of the 3 and had really good artwork on it. So I'll keep it at a 4 out of 10. But it's definitely not something I would say, run out and pick this one up. It's just what it was. But that's all the reviews I have for you guys. So again, this was a Marvel-centric one. Next time I'll do one, it probably might be independent books. I can't remember. I have to go back through the notes and kind of try to keep it in rotation, in a certain rotation, that I'm not giving you too much of one publisher when I do the Cutting My Stack, episodes like this. But this was the Cutting My Stack Marvel episode 5. I'm your host, James Harris. This is the Comic Book Savant podcast. If you guys haven't already, check out the Facebook group. It's facebook.com/groups/the Savant Society. That's where we mingle online and talk comics, get to know one another, and just shoot the breeze about comics in general. So definitely check that out. Request to join. As soon as I see your request, I'll add you onto the group. Also, check out the Patreon. If you like the content, you want to think about supporting the content, consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can find it at patreon.com/comic book savant. If that's not your bag, you just want to shoot a few dollars my way to help go and support the show, and you don't want to do Patreon, I also have a PayPal me thing. All that is on the website, which is comicbooksavant.com. Just look for support. And you can check that out and just do like a one-time donation if you want to do that as well. It's no harm, no foul. Not everybody wants to do something like Patreon. And like I always say with the Patreon, you have extra bonuses. You get an additional podcast every week for as little as $1 a month. You get access to that. But if you're on if you go to the website and you go to what is it? If you go to subscribe, actually, I got to change that and actually put a PayPal me link on the links at the top of the page. But if you go to subscribe, you'll have links to, like, if you want to do the one-time donation, if you want to do the Patreon, all links to all that kind of stuff there, and also to the store. But you also have we have a sweatshirt. I added a sweatshirt to the store not too long ago. We got coffee mugs. We have stickers. We have a Savant Society t-shirt, a standard Comic Book Savant t-shirt with the same logo that you always see. And I got some more designs coming. I'm working with a designer just because of stuff I've had going on in the designer had going on. It's delayed, but stuff is still coming. So don't you fret. It's going to be new designs coming. Probably it'll be at this point next year when you start seeing the new designs. But we got the hoodie. We got, because it's winter, nothing makes a better gift than a Comic Book Savant sweatshirt, our coffee mug. So definitely check all that stuff out. You can find all the links to everything on the website. But that's all I have for you guys for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be back next week for another episode of Comic Book Savant. Until then, you guys stay safe, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.